Good morning, everyone. Ahead of our lesson period 4 this morning, I thought I'd do a quick overview. Now, in your paper 3 mock exam for February mocks, you're going to have a couple of 8 markers. Mr. Freeman's asked us to focus a bit more on 8-mark technique to make sure you nail it. Remember, these are easy questions, so don't write too much. This will be the first question in each half of the paper. Obviously, the format of paper 3 is 8, 10, 12, 20, 8, 10, 12, 20. And we just need to make sure that you're not falling into the time trap of spending too much time on these. We need point, 3 chains of argument contextualized, and a however that is in context with your point and obviously linked to the question itself. If your however points are missing, then you don't have balance. We will cap you at half marks. If your however points are abstract, we will cap your marks at half marks. If you forget one of your howevers and the rest of the answer is perfect, you're probably going to get 7 marks, depending on who's marking it. So be mindful that this is only 8% of the paper, 16 if you add them both together, I suppose. And if you overcompensate on the easy questions, you will not have enough time for your 12 and 20s. So therefore, not getting the grade that you want. Okay? Really important not to over answer these. 1.2 minutes per mark, and that includes getting your evidence out of the case study and writing. So about 2 minutes for quick plan, bit of evidence, 1 minute per mark writing. Move on to the 10 marker. Okay, so we're going to look at these 2 units in the next couple of lessons. And also 4.4.2 is ethics, which clearly link in all of these units as well, and all the themes that we will cover. We've talked about ethics. We've talked about Porter's 5 forces and powers of multinational corporations. And remember, your multinational corporation is a corporation operating in more than one country, hence multinational. To give an example, Taco Bell, a US company, also operates in Brazil. Yeah, quite easy to do that. Don't overlook the obvious. So here's the case study that we've looked at before, and here is an updated version of a 12 marker actually that was asked when this paper came out. And so this is the typical 8-mark structure. So assess 2 legal controls. Okay, so legal controls are clearly what we need to demonstrate an understanding of controlling the actions. So this is actually something else we need to evidence. How are we going to evidence we're controlling the actions? What actions would we want to control of those multinational companies? Well, it doesn't say Taco Bell. The case study is about Taco Bell, and there's also another example in here as well. We're obviously with Tropicana, I suppose, but let's base it around what we've already talked about, such as Brazil. Okay, so assess 2 legal controls, a way of controlling the actions of multinationals in countries such as Brazil. So we need to think about controlling. We need to think about what this is. Well, maybe it's linked to our macroeconomic goals that we know and love. Maybe it's linked to aims that are actually in the case study. Okay, don't generalize. Go and have a look for what the government in this case is looking to achieve. And the case study lays it out brilliantly if you have a look for it. So we can see that the Brazilian government recognizes health problems, okay? And they're thinking about what they can do. Well, introducing regulations, that's one way of controlling people, isn't it? Down here, we've got something else, which is the pressure group. Okay, that's not a typo. So this is something else that actually this report might influence government policy, behaviours, putting pressure on the multinationals. So up here, we have got health concerns. Down here, we have worker safety, minimum wage, those types of things, which is why I put a picture at the beginning of this presentation about pay. Okay, there's lots of information here. The hook in the question is clearly, the legal controls, of controlling actions. Controlling actions, you need to demonstrate knowledge for this, but it's really what we're going to come back to. We're going to come back to how it might control. Your however, therefore, needs to be, however, how might the multinationals sort of get around this in some ways? Okay. So going through this as a structure, we're going to make sure we've got examples of controls. An example of, you could always start off with a quick contextualized definition of a control if you wanted to. However, you're going to talk about two of these because we've got two controls and we're going to give some examples of how they help control the actions of multinationals. So starting with a definition in this one, it's up to you. It might be that you're struggling to think of how to approach this question. Put a definition down in context, the rest will fall into place. Okay, but if you don't contextualize the definition, you're going to have problems if it's not contextualized. If you don't define the key term in the question and you just waffle, you're going to get 0 marks out of 8 and waste 10 minutes writing 0 marks out of 8. Start with a contextualized definition. So we've got certain templates that we sort of practice. So one example of a legal control is, let's start it off. This is really our definition. This is this bit, but at the beginning of my BLT point. Yeah. So one example is, this is an effective way of controlling multinationals in the food sector. Well, that's the one that the case study is about. This could lead to, think about something short term, resulting in something linked to the government's aims in Brazil. Okay, not just repeating the question. Yeah, we're not going to get marks for repeating the question, but link it to the government's aims. We then want to know, however, how might they get around it? Okay, think about it. We're then going to use a prompt to make sure we write about a second example. You'll notice I've left spaces, there's a big space, but I've left spaces between these. Now that's not really to communicate to the examiner, here comes my counter argument, here's another point. It's to communicate to yourself. A common mistake is you will forget the howevers. Sometimes 8 mark questions are evil and it will be assessed to limitations, to disadvantages. And if you only answer the question to disadvantages, there's no balance and therefore you're going to get capped at half marks. Okay, you've got to remember you need these however points. And if you don't have them, you haven't got balanced answer, you're capped. Okay, exactly like we teach you in class. Use these prompts. Another example, one example. It helps you structure your answer and it's very difficult to forget to write the complete answer then, isn't it? Hopefully. So here's our lovely mark scheme. Clearly we are aiming for level 3. Remember to ignore this. Yeah, we're not going to be showing an awareness of competing arguments. That would be our conclusion. And as we know, in the early days of this mark scheme being released, they realised, the chief examiner and his friends realised that actually you can't write a conclusion in 10 minutes on this type of thing. And it was very similar to the 10 marker, for example. So we don't write conclusions for 8 markers, but we do need to have balance. Because if it's not balanced, we see unbalanced, and then we're capped at level 2. And actually, if it's totally unbalanced, you'll be capped at 4 out of 8. Okay, we want to get into here, which means we need logical chains of argument. This does not say wide ranging like we see in the 12 marker. 3 chains of argument is enough. Is it contextualized? Does it talk about behavior? Well, of businesses, definitely we're going to be talking about Taco Bell, aren't we? Okay, so it is balanced, it is contextualized, and we are using the evidence. And if there's numbers here, then great, but it's an 8 marker, unless the question is really evil, telling us to do a calculation, which might happen, by the way. or telling us to draw a diagram, which we've seen in a past AS paper, then it might be supply and demand diagram, quickly write a normal 8 marker. Okay, but we'll see. So first of all, in my plan, I've identified the 2 legal controls. I've got legislation on advertising and marketing, and I've got worker protection laws. I've got my 2 distinctly different points. One example of a legal control is the Brazilian government regulation on advertising, my point. These rules, which include warning consumers about foods high in sugar and salt and saturated fats application, are effective because, start of my chain of argument, it's a bit up here really, they directly target the promotion of unhealthy products. This could lead to decreased consumption of these products, resulting in long-term impact of improved public health, which aligns, as a 4th chain of argument there, with the government's aim to curb obesity and disease. Okay, so we're controlling, and it's an impact on the government here. It could have been an impact on the company, by the way, as in the way that it would stop them from doing it. We're sort of in the middle here. We've then got our however. MNCs like Taco Bell that operate globally, a little bit of a definition in there about Taco Bell being multinational, just to make sure that I'm demonstrating to the examiner that I understand what I'm talking about, may find ways to circumvent, get round these restrictions by adjusting their marketing strategies or exploiting loopholes in regulations, limiting the effectiveness of these regulations. So the point is, the regulations are there to stop multinationals getting loads of customers in to have high sugar, salt and saturated fats in their diet. However, the multinationals might find ways around the legislation. Just make sure you contextualize it. Remember, it's then linked to the goal of the government, which is obviously the regulations to help them, limiting the effectiveness of the government aim. The next one's around worker protection laws. So another example, nice way to start this off to make sure I'm remembering my second point, of legal controls could be stringent worker protection. So really good worker protection laws addressing the issues raised by the supply chain challenge report. These laws could enforce safe working conditions and guarantee minimum wage. This could lead to the improvements in worker safety, and in the longer term, we do love that, it may result in a more stable and productive workforce, which is in line with the government's aim of sustainable economic development and ethical labour practices. Brought it back in to the aim of the company, the country even. Okay, so it's not abstract, it's fully contextualized. So yes, it's a control. This is the possible impact on workers in this case. However, it's directly linked to the business and the aim of the government. However, nice counter argument, MNCs like Taco Bell might minimize the impact of such controls by outsourcing to local contractors. They might just simply pass the problem on to someone else, thereby distancing themselves from direct legal accountability, which could challenge the Brazilian government's ability to enforce these worker protection measures effectively. If these rules are only really aimed at the multinationals, for example, and there's very little rule of law, remember previous units we've studied, it might be that Taco Bell simply pass it down their supply chain. And therefore, they can say, we subcontract out making our tacos, for example, or our fillings, or whatever goes in there, or our advertising, or our leaflet distribution to local homes, and it's not their fault. Okay, one of the benefits of outsourcing. So we're thinking about, again, a way that Taco Bell could get around ethical labour practices? Well, outsource it to someone else that's cheaper, that might be willing to circumvent the rules, and then maybe it doesn't tarnish Taco Bell's reputation. Remember, we've talked about the impact of supply chains on certain products and services. We talked about the American mining company in one of the African states where it was strip mining and it polluted the water source and it became carcinogenic. They closed the gates. They then left the country. There was short-term protests, and yes, there was public uproar. And the example we talked about in class was, when you're squirting bleach down your loo, do you know where the chemicals have come from? Or do you just think Domestos kills all known germs dead? It could be that part of the supply chain is sort of anonymous. Remember this when we're talking about ethics and also other considerations as well. We'll revisit that case study when we do the ethical unit. We've touched upon it in another lesson. Hopefully that was useful, and I shall see you in, well, depends when you watch this video really, but I'll be in class in about 2 hours from now.